Welcome back, everybody. It's another interview special today on the Decline and Fall show. And one of the things that we set ourselves the task of when we started this program was to unravel the mysteries of how power operates within the British state in the modern era. And as we dig further into this, and contrary to the view that many of us grow up with, the institution of the monarchy remains absolutely central to actually understanding how the British political system works, and more so, and how the British establishment operates. And therefore, it is perhaps puzzling to those who believe that Britain is the democracy that many of its leaders proclaim that it is, that there is so little actual real journalism and research done on the institution of the monarchy and the personnel within it, particularly, of course, the royal family themselves. So therefore, in order to illustrate the actual realities of power in the British state and society, it's always interesting to speak to somebody who has done the work. And today we're joined, I'm very happy to say, by historian and researcher Andrew Lownie, who has very much done the work when it comes to actually looking at the institution of the monarchy and the individuals that make it up. He's here today to talk about his latest book, which is literally entitled The Rise and Fall of the House of York, covering both the now thoroughly disgraced Prince Andrew and his wife, formerly known as Sarah Ferguson. So, Andrew, welcome to the Decline and Fall show today.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and particularly since in some ways we're so aligned, because I mean, in some ways the theme of all my books is about exploring the nature of power in modern Britain and the institutions, how it operates, particularly in the royal family, the censoring of our history, the destruction of records, the curation of the historical record, and the way the royal family has been basically protected, still is protected, through government legislation, the fact they're exempted from the Freedom of Information Act, there's no parliamentary scrutiny, they get everyone to sign NDAs. And as you say, most of the books written about the royal family are hagiographic, written by basically press releases from the palace. And it's time that there were more historians who began to look at it. It's difficult because, of course, they have powers of patronage and pressure on us, but to actually look at how they operate. And one of the things that really fascinates me, again, is the symbiotic relationship between the media and the palace, the way they put pressure on the media, the way they control them through the royal rota. And the result is we have a very distorted picture of the past, particularly of the royal family. And it seems to me contingent on all of us as historians and writers that we should be holding power to account.
Well, very much amen to everything that you've just said, Andrew. Yeah, we are honoured to have you on, and I think just as a personal note to our viewers, Alex and I strongly urge you to get yourself a copy of entitled. It is an extraordinarily detailed and frequently disturbing dive into Prince Andrew's life from his very early age to where he is now, which is, a disgraced and rather ostracized figure, spending his days playing golf and watching television. There is a particular public understanding of how he was his fall from grace from when he returned from the Falklands, this triumphant war hero in 1982, to today. This book shed so much more light than I had any idea about what happened not only what happened in the intervening time, but in the formative years of Prince Andrew's life. And it covers all manner of topics, including Andrew's exploitation of his position and influence to enrich himself, his relationship with the notorious Jeffrey Epstein, which began earlier, lasted longer, and was much more intensive than has hitherto been revealed. So, yeah, I think that you've done an enormous service to history by writing this, Andrew. And yeah, I think that leads kind of neatly into our first kind of core question, which is throughout your description of Andrew's upbringing, he comes across as someone who was more indulged, more spoiled, more entitled by design than his older siblings. Um, do you think that this feeds into who and what he subsequently became?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a great believer when you write biographies, you do cradle to grave because you can't
Mm,
understand people unless you understand their childhood. And I mean, this is again is very formative in terms of Sarah Ferguson's the way she's behaved. But yes, he basically was never disciplined as a child. He could do what he wanted. He was spoiled. The Queen admitted that. There was, and this is the story of his life. He knows he can get away with things because no one is going to criticize him or say anything. And this has created this very entitled, pompous, arrogant character. And what is interesting, as you say, he's part of the second family. So Anne and Charles are not like this, but actually Edward isn't like this. And that is one of the great mysteries. The other is that Prince Philip didn't discipline him. I think Prince Philip would have been shocked by the way he turned out. And it brings us back to the fact that the Queen really didn't do a very good job. In fact, she colluded with Andrew all the way through his life to protect him, to entertain all these dodgy dictators at Buckingham Palace and elsewhere. And when we think that she puts the monarchy ahead of her own family, actually, that is not the case when it comes to Andrew. So this becomes a book not just about financial corruption of one senior royal and his ex-wife, but actually about how endemic the problem is within the wider royal family. Not only did the Yorks say that to her friends that they shouldn't talk to me, and of course it's got people to sign NDAs, but the Foreign Office told the diplomats not to talk to me. We've seen the palace actually try and shut down the story with Amy Robach and ABC, threatening to cut any links with ABC television in terms of interviews that they ran the story of Geoffrey and Andrew. And we've had a 4-year campaign to get access to Andrew's records as a special trade envoy, a civil service post paid for us by the taxpayer. And yet these papers are basically mysteriously unavailable to us. So, I mean, there's something rotten, I have to say, in the state of Denmark. And this is where programs like yours are so valuable and appreciated because I've been shouting this for about 20 years, and I felt a sort of lone voice in the wilderness, just pictured as some sort of nutter, some sort of gossip monger, when actually what we're talking about is just corruption within a democracy, the suppression of our history, and as I say, the creation of the historical record. And as historians, our job is to tell the truth about the past, not to act as some sort of court historian.
Indeed, and I think I might add as well that the former Lib Dem MP Steve Baker attempted to he wrote a book trying to delve into the real role of the monarchy in British society and why this is subject to zero serious media scrutiny. It sank without trace. It was not reviewed in by mainstream publications. He was not invited onto the BBC to discuss his findings. I would see this as a very useful companion book to yours, if I may say so.
Norman Baker has another book on royal finances coming out, I think, next month. But I've got the same case. I'm an agent for writers, and I have an author who wants to book on royal finances, very serious writer. And when he went to his regular publisher, he said, well, we don't want to do it because of royal sensitivities, which presumably means that the boss wants a knighthood. So he's had to live up. But yeah, I mean, it's extraordinary, the secreteness and the deference that still exist in this country. I mean, a lot of papers haven't covered my book. The Independent, for example, The Sun, papers like Vanity Fair and Tatler did interviews and then in the end didn't run them. They said that there were legal problems. I've had stories from some of my journalistic friends saying they were told not to cover the book. You may see, not so much in Britain, but in the States, I've always had very good reviews on Amazon. I've got a succession of one-star reviews, presumably pushed out by bots. I've heard stories about Arab billionaires who pay PR firms to go out and discredit the book. And we had this, of course, with poor old Virginia Giuffre. Ghislaine and Andrew were working with PR firms to try and undermine Virginia Giuffre. And we have plenty of email correspondence to support that. And the BBC feel that they're great champions of talking to power to talking to power. But actually, we've got to remember with that Newsnight interview, they tried to suppress any sort of coverage as a Jeffrey Andrews story. And the only people who were pushing this were not Newsnight, but were this unit in Ireland, Panorama unit, who fought against a great deal of opposition to get their story out.
No, indeed, indeed. Well, I mean, it's quite understandable. No, not justifiable, but understandable. Why there's been such an effort to suppress your work, because there are some absolutely astonishing disclosures in it, and I think that something that really jumped out to me was Prince Andrew's clear predilection towards criminal or or at least dubious morally or otherwise behavior from a very early age. And I mean, you note in the book that sources close to Andrew suggest that he had his first sexual experience when he was just 8 years old, and then lost his virginity at 11. And this does seem to have been a through line throughout his life of just being encouraged to engage in depravity, and then receiving protection, quite an extraordinary shield of protection. Which is, I mean, you mentioned how the Queen always said that she put monarchy before family, but that she quite clearly indulged him up to and including allowing him to adopt the surname Mountbatten, which was very much verboten. Following the First World War. Why do you think that was?
Well, I think we've got several things there. I mean, in terms of the sexual history, I felt that was important to understand. In some ways, he's great that he is a victim. I mean, he was abused as a child, in fact, a bit like Mountbatten. And that was supported by good sources, including sources who were at school with him. And I think that explains the constant need for sexual gratification, which was like Sir Epstein. I mean, they were joined in that way. I mean, your second point is about the sort of criminal activity that was going on, and I think that's the thing I would really want to stress in the book. I mean, other people have picked up other issues, but and there's a lot of material that I couldn't put in the book for legal reasons. Which, I mean, maybe we're doing an updated paperback, we will be able to include some of it. For example, I had a lot of material on Mandelson, which I've now been, has now been proved to be correct, which wasn't put in the book. And there's stories of bribes in Kazakhstan, complaints taken to the Queen about this, and the Queen just ignoring it. There were MPs 20 years ago going to the National Crime Agency saying there's a case to investigate here. Everyone's been focused on the sexual allegations and Epstein, but actually I think there's a much stronger case to be made for his criminal activities, alleged criminal activities, we should say, and people should be investigating it. I can't remember what your third point was. About he's been protected by the Queen. He's been protected by the institutions, and that's happened all the way through. I mean, ambassadors who complained about him found that their next postings were pretty grim. Protection officers who complained found they were back on the beach in Brixton. People learned not to say anything. I mean, even people in the Navy. I mean, no one quite knew what to do with him in the Navy, and that's why he was given the job of trade envoy. But he, they kept him in there as long as they could. They created jobs for him, but people who gave him bad reports, which are known as 206s, found again their naval careers were curtailed, and those who basically gave him good report found that they did well. I mean, the training officer said to me he was the worst pilot in the squadron, and yet he won the prize for best pilot. So, no wonder he felt that he could walk on water, because everyone told him all the way through his life he could. And actually, he's a rather pathetic figure. I think there are mental health problems there. He's certainly very socially gauche. I mean, really odd behavior in the way he behaves. And this was perhaps why the Queen was protective towards him, because she realized he really was a bit odd.
Yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned his the fact that he was the himself the victim of sexual abuse at a young age, and there may be you may have restrictions one way or another on what we're able to discuss, but I mean, I found the clear proximity of Andrew to the Mountbatten family quite potentially relevant in this regard, because I mean, Mountbatten has been fingered as a frequenter of the Kinkora Boys Home, which was this den of sexual abuse, which the MI5 was keeping an extremely close eye on. On top of him adopting the Mountbatten name, he was an associates with Mountbatten's children or grandchildren at school, and I believe that one of Mountbatten's granddaughters was potentially in the running to be his wife at some stage. Do you think that Mountbatten had a particular influence over Andrew, and could Mountbatten's own personal sexual predilections have rubbed off on him one way or another?
Well, I mean, I wrote a biography of Mountbatten, and Mountbatten's one of the people who found the FBI files that showed he pedophile. But no, I haven't. I mean, Mountbatten died in 1979. Andrew left school in 1979. I've not found, I mean, clearly there are very close associations with Charles, but I've not found those associations with Mountbatten, which you're absolutely right about the very close-knit relations between the Mountbatten family and the Royals. You're absolutely right. A lot of the grandchildren were at school at Gordonstoun with Andrew. One of the things that struck me, I went and stayed with one of Mountbatten's girlfriends, and she had her son there who had been at school with Andrew, and her grandchildren were also staying, and they were at school with William and Harry. So you suddenly realize how close these networks are and how connected they are. And I think what's very is they have this form of patronage. I mean, they'll give you quangos, they'll give you honors, they'll make sure that you've got a good pension or whatever. And time again, I found with politicians that I wanted to talk to, that suddenly they were working for the royal family and they were not going to talk. So it's down how the networks work. It's funny enough, I just watched The Godfather and I can see lots of parallels between the royal family and the Corleones. But you can see how it works, and certainly I've experienced some of the pressure from trying to undermine my authority as a writer, to trying to prevent people from talking about me, dismissive reviews, the absence of any coverage. They do have a lot of levers that they can pull, and I think that's why a lot of people don't want to raise their head above the parapet. But the more people who are prepared to speak out and to say this isn't right, the sooner I think things will change. And I speak as a monarchist, as someone who thinks this is a good system. It just needs to be clean. And at the moment, I'm afraid it isn't.
Well, that leads us rather neatly, Andrew, into the role that the Duke played as a trade envoy under the government of Tony Blair, and he developed a series of links via this role with regimes such as the Kazakh regime, which is, for those of you unaware, is a deeply corrupt, very squalid dictatorship that is run by a bunch of corrupt ex-Communist Party of the Soviet Union figures who cashed in when the system collapsed in 1991. And British business was very keen on getting into places like Kazakhstan. There's a lot of money to be made there via natural resources. And Andrew himself managed to get, of course, head up a lot of these delegations at a time when a lot of money was being made there. And it's you suggest in the book that he developed through these connections ways to fund his very expensive tastes via connections in the Central Asian region. Andrew, could you expand upon that for us, please?
Yes, I mean, I think one of the extraordinary things was to discover that he'd been actually operating there since the 1990s, when he was still in the Navy, operating with people like Mark Thatcher. The other only thing is, you're absolutely right. It was both Tony Blair and Peter Mandelson who had pushed for this job as a trade envoy. And surprise, surprise, Peter Mandelson and Tony Blair pop up extensively in terms of his activities, not just in Central Asia, but also in places like Libya. Unfortunately, a lot of that stuff was taken out by the lawyers. So really frustratingly, because I had all the Mandelson stuff. I had all the stuff about Fergie's links with Epstein after 2011. But that's for trying to write these books in a world where very powerful people, will put in slaps and will litigate against publishers to prevent them exposing what they get up to. But, Tony Blair, for example, worked for the Kazakh government. I mean, he was, I think, instrumental in some of the picture opportunities that were presented with the president of Kazakhstan, with Andrew. And there's certainly lots of stories about Andrew having financial interests, golf courses and other things in Kazakhstan. One of the problems I found with when my researchers went there was that they were frightened, and people were frightened of talking to them because these people are still powerful and can still make life very difficult. And so even if one protects one's sources and is very discreet, understandably people don't want to talk. But absolutely, Kazakhstan was a big area. Of course, Azerbaijan was another. Andrew made a lot of private visits. This is why I'm so interested to get hold of this documents about his travel to these regions, because it would tell us who he saw, who he brought with him, what he did. And all these things are still, 20 years later, basically unavailable to the public, even though in terms of the Public Record Act, they should be made public. So there's a really big problem here, but the media aren't really picking up on this. I mean, all the mainstream media. I mean, fortunately, parliamentarians, with the great exception of people like Norman Baker, who are no longer involved in politics, have tried. It's interesting that people like Chris Bryant, who was a great critic of Andrew when he was a trade envoy, who is now a government minister, is not answering any emails from me and going to be the radar here. So that's one of the problems, that everyone somehow gets either bullied or tamed, and isn't prepared to expose this.
No, indeed, and I think that, I mean, at the Decline and Fall, we've discussed the role of MI6 and BP in bringing the current government to power, and how central they are to maintaining that government, which is deeply corrupt and deeply authoritarian and repressive, like in power, through all sorts of rather disreputable tactics, and how the BP and MI6 got their hooks into the Aliyev family via in some cases state-funded like orgies and drug and alcohol fueled parties, and it's like, I mean, so it's somehow unsurprising that Prince Andrew crops up there. And yes, I think that the documents you described, which we are not allowed to see for whatever reason, are they might offer a gold mine of information on his activities. I mean, and this in turn, I think, his and Prince Andrew's love of money, his sexual activities. Your book sheds, as I mentioned, kind of hitherto unknown light on the relationship between Epstein and Prince Andrew. And can you possibly lay out what you've discovered there?
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, to my shame, I haven't seen your study of Azerbaijan and MI6. I should, because absolutely, I mean, a lot of the diplomats there were MI6. I've certainly talking to businessmen who operated there. It was pretty standard practice to compromise people through honey traps, and Andrew certainly was compromised, and there's compromat on him there. But in terms of the relationship with Epstein, Andrew's line is that it began in the late 1990s, when his own private secretary said it began at least 10 years earlier. He claimed it ended in 2010. Well, we have documentary evidence from legal depositions. It ended in 2011, and I suspect went on till 2019. His ex-wife was staying in Epstein's flats until at least 2013, and that's only because my sources saw her there, but I don't have sources for the post-2013 period. So, I mean, the relationship was much more extensive than they've claimed. They claim to be rather casual acquaintances, where there were 18 numbers for Sarah Ferguson in the Black Book, 16 for Andrew. The place, they actually had a suite of rooms called the Britannia Suite, where they stayed in New York. And, as things come out, and I hope more will come out with the release of the Epstein files, with the publication of Giffrey's book, with victims bringing out their stories on Capitol Hill, perhaps through some sort of parliamentary privilege, with more legal depositions being unsealed. There's going to be this drip effect of stuff showing how, frankly, both Sarah Ferguson and Andrew have lied to cover up their involvement with Epstein. So in some ways, it's exciting. I kind of thought they were going to be able to shut down the story, but there's clearly a leak there. I don't know where the leak's coming from. We've seen the sacking of Peter Mandelson because of those 18,000 emails to Bloomberg. We've had these emails released, Sarah. David Boyes has talked about stuff that he's seen, which doesn't present Andrew in a good light. So, I'm optimistic that more material will appear, and it'll be much harder for him to sustain the narrative that he's tried. And of course, what they've done is they've just dug themselves deeper and deeper, in the way that Trump is digging himself deeper and deeper, because of course he has a very close involvement with Epstein as well. This is ironic. Here, this is Epstein saying he was going to Trump saying he was going to drain the swamp, and it turns out he's part of the problem.
No, indeed, indeed, and I think that there was an interest. It was certainly very interesting that yeah, as you document, Trump publicly made claims about how about knowing and having met Andrew, only to only to claim that he didn't know him. Which is suspicious in itself, and on the subject of media suppression, I believe that the independent journalist Whitney Webb, she found a large number of mainstream news reports that had mysteriously been deleted from the internet from the early 2000s, in which Andrew is referred to as as the boyfriend of Maxwell, and enjoying the company of young girls in Thailand. So this was kind of an open secret that was then subsequently memory hold, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. Thailand was one of his great playgrounds. I have the story of him turning up at the celebrations for the King of Thailand, where he went through 40 prostitutes in 4 days. And that came from, from a diplomat, from news journalists there, from actually hotel staff who was kind of shocked even for Thailand, didn't even remember the Thai royal family. But you're absolutely right. One of the advantages I had was I was able to get hold of the print news cuttings going back to the 1960s for Andrew, and indeed Sarah Ferguson when she popped up later in the 1980s. And there's a lot of stuff there that everyone has forgotten about, particularly from the tabloids. And in some ways, one of the tragedies with the hacking scandal is good investigative journalism that was being done by people like the News of the World has gone. And of course, people now can get stuff taken off the internet if they're sufficiently well connected. So and Whitney Webb has done us all a great service, the research that she's done. And we just need more people like her and you to expose all this. I think with social media, we've got to the stage. I've just noticed a sort of sea change in the last few years, particularly when this book came out. But people are no longer prepared to buy the official story. The comments, even from quite right wing papers, to these articles is of outrage and frustration. It's all part of, I think, a wider sort of suspicion of officialdom and the fact that that there isn't sufficient transparency and accountability. And that's a hopeful sign that maybe things will change. My worry is that nothing will change, that the royals will just sit this out. There'll be some new crisis in the world, and they'll just stay as they are, and the caravan will move on. But this seems to me it should be a wake-up call to them. It should say, look, Andrew and Fergie are a liability. They're undermining the credibility of the royal family and its reputational damage. And unless you are firm and cut them loose, then you're going to find that they're going to infect the whole body politic.
Indeed. Well, yes, and just to jump back onto the question of relationship with Epstein. Now, it's obvious what Prince Andrew was drawn towards in terms of Epstein. He was a mover of gigantic amounts of money, Jeffrey Epstein, that is, and was able to provide Prince Andrew with the girls that he was so interested in. And so that the attraction from his side there to Epstein is clear. But from your research in the book, Andrew, what do you see as being the attraction of the relation towards the relationship with Prince Andrew on the Epstein side? What was Epstein getting out of this, do you think?
Well, I think for both of them, there was contacts. I mean, Andrew talks about the importance of contacts in the Newsnight interview, and that was certainly true of Epstein. I mean, here was Andrew. He could have lunch or dinner with anyone he wanted. He clearly had picked up very useful contacts in terms of his 10 years as a trade envoy, his time in the MOD, etc. So that was one thing. So for networking, they mutually support each other. I think the most important thing was that, and I think Epstein described him along with Bill Clinton as the Super Bowl trophy. He was status, he was respectability. Epstein, old math teacher who'd been sacked from Bear Stearns, was a guy from the wrong side of the tracks in New York. And here he was being able to go to Balmoral, Sandringham, sit in the throne room at Buckingham Palace. And basically, he could just tell Andrew who he wanted to meet. And, this was someone that people felt they could do business with. So, it was a very mutually helpful relationship between the two. And he knew that Andrew was vulnerable through the debts of his wife and through his propensity for young girls. And therefore, he was able to play him. I mean, people describe things and the mouse. And that's what Epstein did. He traded information. He blackmailed people. He was selling information, in effect, to the world's intelligence services. He was offering services to people, whether it was hiding their money or networking and putting people in touch with each other. So he was the classic middleman. And Andrew was a very useful character for him in terms of doing that business.
Yes, and the interesting thing about all of the material that you cover in the book is that a lot of this is or was hinted at various times in mainstream media coverage. Like like I remember being around about 10 years old, and the tabloids covering extensively like the personal scandals of the Duke and Duchess of York, of the Prince and Princess of Wales as they were then. There's always been a level, or certainly since like the 80s, a level of sort of tabloid scandals come out about the royals. But an investigation into like the influence that they have, where the money comes from and where the money goes, that seems to be off limits. So you can run stories about personal scandals, sexual scandals, that seems to be accepted, but go near the money and go near the connections and what that means in terms of how Britain is run and the role that Britain plays in the world, and that is shut down. So I want to, given your experience with the book, like how do you see it in terms of why that is? Why is that investigation never done properly?
Well, I mean, they're very clever the way they hide their money. So they use offshore accounts, including the Queen. They use nominee accounts. So you have, for example, Margaret York or Andrew Inverness, not names that people would know them as. You have frontmen like Dominic Hampshire. You have bank accounts in China. You have operations kind of off the books. I had forensic accountants go through their companies who were kind of perplexed because they're constantly setting up new companies. They keep them going with confirmation statements, but none of these companies seem to have any sort of activity whatsoever. And this is a classic way of hiding money laundering. And we have a whole series of legal cases, of which I think the two most famous are the case with Salman Turk and one with Gate Ventures. And so these are just isolated activities that you just get a little glimpse of something where monies were being paid to the Yorks, which they haven't been able to explain. I mean, large sums of money, £1.3 million, an annual sort of salary of 270,000. And I think that's what's kind of damning, that when the press go to them and say, "Look, can you explain what were you doing for this money?" They refuse to explain. And just in the way that Andrew prevented, tried to avoid any sort of summons being brought to him, refused to cooperate with any of the law enforcement agencies, even as material witness. We see this with some of these operations that they just keep quiet and somehow the press moves on. And I think, I spent 4 years, I was digging as hard as I could. I employed all sorts of people to do research for me who are far more qualified to do so than I am. But even I came up with only glimpses. And so poor newspapers with very limited resources, can't really do much. And that's what they count on. I think there should be a proper investigation of Andrew's time as special trader, with investors being forced to give evidence. I think there is a case for the National Crime Agency to investigate him and his activities. I'm just amazed that when these cases like Some Turk came up, that there wasn't more of a furore. But actually, what happened at the time was basically some quiet deal was done between the Yorks and the woman who had paid them this money, and the whole thing was shut down. And we just need to have a slightly we need to have the instruments of the state actually taking a more of a prominent role here. But of course, they won't investigate the royal family. Time and time again, people on the Epstein case called for investigations, just for as a material witness, as they say, including Channel 4, Virginia Giuffre herself. I think Di Davis, the head of Royal Security, also called for it. And they did absolutely nothing, or they would come back and say, "We've looked at it, nothing to see here." And when I've put in FOIs asking what they've done, they've refused to either confirm or deny that they actually investigated. And this is the problem. There are just too many, a bit like what's happening in Trump's USA. There are just too many fellow travelers who are basically supporting this version of civil liberties and the rule of law. And going along with it. And we need more whistleblowers. We need more people to break rank and say this is wrong and refuse to do the things that they're doing. But it does sort of bring home that, we're worried about Trump's America, but actually here, we're, I think, a pretty corrupt banana public ourselves.
Indeed. I mean, and on that subject, like I note that you touch upon how then Prince, now King Charles, was never overly fond of Andrew. So I mean, on top of if you're able to go into that at all, that would be of great interest. Prince Charles, of course, is notorious, or should be even more notorious than he is, for petitioning ministers to amend legislation in his explicit interests, in absolutely flagrant, brazen breach of conventions on political neutrality. And there have been some communications released between Tony, I believe it was Tony Blair's administration, some of his ministers, including Tony Blair himself, where they write fawningly about how they are, referring to Charles, your Royal Highness's most humble and obedient servant, and talking about how much they value and look forward to his views. Does Andrew potentially have a similar kind of rapport with governments of the day?
Well, certainly, Andrew was, could be briefed by governments, particularly with trade envoy. I mean, he tried to office's investigation into arms dealing in Saudi Arabia, for example, and was appalled, the rule of law should operate there. I can see sometimes you've got to sup with the devil, and the royals are used as instruments of government policy. But you're absolutely right. Valentine Lowe talks a little bit about this in his new book about the relationship between government and the monarchy. The Guardian had to take the case of the Black Spidery letters to judicial review at huge cost and over many years, in order to get any sort of scrutiny and transparency about what Charles has been doing. And I suspect so much happens verbally, it's not stuff that's recorded and that we're ever going to know about. But it does raise questions about how uh, people with influence can change things. And you're absolutely right; they can influence legislation in the interests of the monarchy or the Duchy of Cornwall and the Duchy of Lancaster. But the public don't seem to be engaged by this. We've had Channel 4 and Sunday Times do big investigations into their finances, stuff that was pretty shocking. And yet, it's a 1 week wonder, and then everyone sort of forgets about it. So it's weird. In some ways, I think the greatest problem monarchy has is apathy. That as younger people don't really care about it, that be seen to be totally irrelevant. It won't be a scandal that gets them. I think in the end, it may be just the fact that no one can be bothered with them.
Well, I mean, I think there is a deliberate obfuscation of how much influence the monarchy actually has in this country. I think that it is not just merely ceremonial. I mean, there is that old line from I think it was one of a British constitutional scholar in the 19th century that said that the British governmental system is divided between two sections, the dignified and the efficient. The efficient being the civil service, parliament, etc. The royal family being the dignified section of that. But there seems to be much more of a crossover of the royals into the realm of the political than heretofore has been properly investigated. And it is, I think, more than just ceremonial in terms of the role that they play, because it's not by accident that the oath of the armed forces is taken to the serving monarch at the time. It is the monarchy. The serving monarch is, of course, the head of the national religion, the Church of England, and the monarchy is central to the powers that are exercised nominally by the prime minister on behalf of the monarch, and that's something which is very little explained in terms of I mean, when we were young, it was not explained to us when we were at school. You had to go and study the British Constitution at further and higher education to find this thing out. So it seems that the role of the monarchy, along with how Britain actually operates, is routinely clouded in terms of it's never properly explained to British citizens how their country is run. It's the unwritten constitution, the role that the role that the king or queen plays, the fact that so many powers come from the monarch to be exercised by the prime minister. None of this is made clear, and I think that personally, my reflection on that is that that is quite deliberate. They don't want people to understand how the system works. But having done as much research as you have into the institution of the monarchy, Andrew, what's your view on that matter?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think they have much more influence than you realize. I mean, one of the problems I had with the book was that ambassadors would say, "I'm His Majesty's ambassador," or politicians would say, "I'm His Majesty's, a government minister," and therefore they felt that they couldn't talk about stuff because it was disloyal. I've just actually been at lunch today with a group, a sort of private dining club, which is filled with ex-military people, and it's clear that they feed information through various channels through to the royal family about the armed forces. But there are lots and lots of these channels. Some research many years ago into something called the Club, which had been set up during the time of Samuel Johnson, which had automatically, for example, the monarch's private secretary. So it's a group that met once a month at one of the London clubs. I think it was restricted to about 24 people, but there were, all the people who could pull the levers of power: the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Lord Chancellor, the monarch's private secretary, the Chief of Defence Staff, all were members. And when I interviewed them, they said, "Well, we just talk about cricket, nothing very important." But you can imagine people like this would be a very useful instrument to talk about more important things than government. And it was very interesting when I did my book on Mountbatten. There's a section of the book about a potential coup against Harold Wilson's government, in which Lord Mountbatten was sort of onto. And you suddenly see that there is scope for extra parliamentary activity. I mean, it was vetoed, I think, by the Queen, who felt this was unconstitutional. But the fact that it went as far as it did, and that Mountbatten, who after all should have known that, did counter it for a long time, does suggest that clearly there have been temptations, shall we say, to work outside the parliamentary system. which is something, we imagine that might happen in a sort of African dictatorship, but we don't think could happen here. But yeah, they're very well informed. I mean, this is why, the Queen turning a blind eye to Andrew is deliberate. I mean, she was very well informed. I know from my time writing a book on Duke of Windsor that police protection officers would report back to the monarch. There are lots and lots of channels. Intelligence services will also report back. There are sections that deal with this. So, yeah, I mean, we do have this in some ways, this alternative structure. We forget how close the monarchy is to the intelligence services. Many people who serve in the monarch are former or indeed current serving intelligence officers. A friend of mine was asked to be a private secretary who's a career MI6 officer. People like Christopher Geit, the private secretary, had been in intelligence. We had MI5, I think, as head of the household. I know that Prince Philip particularly, but others, including, funnily enough, Prince Andrew, took a close interest in intelligence services. So there are all these, as in, intertwined networks, and quite how just because people are connected doesn't mean things happen. But it's very difficult to link causality to connection. But there are opportunities and structures in place to operate outside the mainstream, certainly.
Yes, certainly, and that's one of the key things that we like to focus on here. Just as a supplementary question, Andrew, you mentioned, of course, the notorious Peter Mandelson earlier, who, of course, pops up over and over again in the Epstein affair and is connected to, of course, Prince Andrew. And now he has just recently been dismissed from a post, his very prominent post as ambassador to the United States. But given what you've just been talking about like the amount of information that he's known about these people, just wanted to ask your opinion on this. Is it conceivable, given everything you've researched and found out, that the current Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, was not aware of the very dubious connections that Peter Mandelson had with Jeffrey Epstein, and that he was not briefed about this by the security services prior to the decision to appoint Mandelson?
Well, I'm often surprised how little due diligence is done on various people connected in government. Going back to Meghan Markle and Fergie, but no, I think of experience of public appointments. There's a very rigorous system that goes into play. They do a lot of work. They have clearly a lot of information, and so no, I think they would have been perfectly clear about Mandelson's connections. They'd appeared in the press. Such material. And I have no doubt the intelligence services would have known about Mandelson and his activities. Problem is, Mandelson and Blair were two of the chief people who pushed Andrew. They're two of the people who he actually ended up doing business with. They're two of the people who, since they left government, have made a fortune from their work for some pretty dubious people. And it just brings home the fact that the system is not very good at ensuring that people are properly scrutinized. It's I find it extraordinary, that appointment. I mean, he'd been caught twice. You get a sense of people, and that these are people that people be avoiding Epstein. I mean, there was plenty of information out there, and we've got to remember also these people were still very happily involved with Epstein after he came out of prison as a convicted paedophile or soliciting for prostitution a young person. But there were plenty of stories running around the press about it. Mandelson. So I think they just made the decision that hopefully they won't be caught and they'll get away with it, and they'll somehow try and talk their way out of it. But it's really foolish, and time again. So it's one of the themes of my books. The cover up is always worse than the initial crime. And I can stand reputational manner. They seem to dig themselves deeper rather than sort of actually put their hands up and say, I'm God.
Kit, do you have anything further? Final word from you?
Yeah, well, yeah, something that did jump out to me, amongst everything else, was you talk about how younger generations are rather switched off from the monarchy, and how this grants them kind of extra layer of impunity, perhaps. But can you see like the institution of the monarchy as it presently stands, like enduring very much further? It kind of the apathy of younger generations could suggest that the British monarchy is receding into irrelevance to an extent.
Well, I'm certainly more worried, this week than I was actually even a month ago, because of the scandals there and the lack of grip in dealing with them, the pattern reaction. You know, we think, it depends how they respond to this. If they stick their head in the sands and sit on the fence as they always do, then this situation is just. They survived 1,000 years. They survived the marital problems of Charles and Diana. There have been scandals before, like Fergie and the News of the World thing. But yeah, this feels that the institution is corrupt, and if stories begin to emerge about other members of the royal family, perhaps lining their own pockets on the basis of their royal position, then I think that could be very, very difficult. We're moving, I think, to a more European style monarchy, a more slimmed down monarchy. And in some ways, if we just concentrate on the direct line of succession, and if there are no scandals there, which I suspect there won't be, then they'll be fine. But if they continue to have all these buffoons on the balcony who are busy lining their own pockets, then I think people are going to get fed up. And questions are going to be asked about their funding, about the cost of their security, for example. There are studies now that they actually add very little to charities fundraising, and people are going to wonder, why should they bother? But more parliamentary scrutiny, need to reform that FOI Act so that actually we can ask questions about them. They can't hide behind. And I think we need the media to be a little braver in terms of the way they cover stories. There are plenty of stories I'm sure we all know about which have not been covered by the media because they're scared. And one of the sort of, I suppose, encouraging things is I talked yesterday to the Foreign Press Association, and they're not part of the Royal Rota. They can afford to be slightly more independent, and now stories can appear on social media. They can, which of course the press can cover here, and puts more pressure on the palace. So the palace needs to sort of adapt to the modern world, and I think they need to, as I say, get ahead of the story rather than constantly be reacting to it too little, too late.
No, indeed, indeed. And I would just say in closing, yes, that again, our dear viewers, please check out Entitled. It is an extraordinary tour de force, and I'm very much looking forward to an expanded paperback edition, if that's possible. Andrew, thanks so much for joining us. How can people support your work?
That's very kind of you. Well, I'd love to hear from anyone who has stories about Andrew and Fergie for the paperback. There are lots and lots of avenues I'm still investigating. The book should be available in all bookshops. It should be available online from retailers like Amazon. I have got websites. You just Google my name, and I'm always happy to engage with people and to help them in any way in terms of getting hold of the book or in terms of information. And in some ways, right there, it's a collaborative. I think we can get some change. I hope there's been a shift in the dial, and that people are now slightly more aware of the nature of our current uh, constitution and how it operates.
And indeed, the crisis, it seems to be suffering in largely in secret. But yes, again, thank you so much for joining us, Andrew. It's been a great conversation. Yeah.
God bless you and take care. Very nice to talk to you. Yeah, I do really on it. Okay, yeah, I do really mean take care. Right. I have no suicidal thoughts at the moment. Excellent. And I'm not like getting near any open windows. Okay.
Yeah. All right. God bless you. Bye bye, Andrew.